Again, welcome. We're going to get started shortly. If you can put your name, your pronouns, excuse me, and your organization in the chat, that'd be fantastic. And please go on mute if you're not speaking. Um, it's 12, so I want to go ahead and get started. As you know, we want to respect your time. My name's Jennifer Parrish Taylor. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Again, please go on mute if you're not speaking. That'd be greatly appreciated. I am the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy here at the League. And I'm going to ask my team to mute everyone because someone is on not on mute, and we can hear you. So thank you. Again, this presentation is going to be recorded so that we can share out to folks who weren't able to make it today and with our members through our social media, etc. Again, please put your name, your pronouns, and your organization in the chat, and we'd go ahead and get started. So, as I mentioned, I was going to say it again, my name is Jennifer Parrish Taylor. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy here at the League. And our commitment and our responsibility is to have the broader view of all the issues that impact our communities, identify their root causes, and develop solutions informed by the community, which lead to systemic and sustainable change. We do this work through our advocacy and civic engagement programs that equip Black Oregonians with the tools to influence public policy and legislation. Our advocacy and civic engagement programs are proof that through skillful organizing, Black Oregonians influence public policy and legislation, and promote racial equity. We offer powerful trainings to promote social justice and civic leadership. We hold public forums on important issues in our communities, and we canvass and get out the vote. We push Oregon to be a more just and equitable place to live, work, and thrive. And we're advocates and organizers. So, want to kick off next slide. Just acknowledging that it is indeed Black History Month. We want to honor those legislators, organizers, and Black folks in the community who are doing the good work of advocating for all of our people, and thought this quote by Ida B. Wells really framed the work that we do at the League and continue to do. The way to right wrongs, excuse me, is to turn the light of truth upon them. And that's really our goal, is to turn the light of truth upon all issues that impact our communities, and really work with legislators and other nonprofit organizations to ensure that our communities are represented. So I'd like to introduce one of our participants today. Her name is Jessica Maravilla. She's the ACLU Policy Director. And Jessica leads the ACLU of Oregon's policy and legislative strategies, program, and projects by working collaboratively with elected and non-elected leaders, coalition allies, and partners and community members across the Oregon. I've had the great pleasure of working with Jessica on several different issues, and to lead on some of our highest priorities here at the League this legislative session. I will make notes, next slide, that Representative Janelle Bynum from District 39 will be joining us later. She currently is in committee, and we're hoping that that will wrap in time for her to join our conversation today. And Representative Janelle Bynum currently serves House District 39, representing Sunnyside, Happy Valley, parts of North and South Clackamas, and South Oregon City. Representative Bynum chairs the Committee on Economic Development and Small Business, co-chairs the Joint Committee on Semiconductors, and is a member of the House Committee on Judiciary. And so we'll go to the next slide to talk about our agenda. And so the legislative long session began January 17th. Feels like it's already been a good 3 months, but it runs until June 25th. And so our department will be tracking close to 100 pieces of legislation, but today we're going to uplift 8 pieces of legislation that we'll really be leaning into, though we will be submitting written and virtual testimony for all the pieces that we were tracking. And I want to turn it over to my team to highlight just the 8 pieces that we're going to be talking about today. And we'll have this information on our website about the other pieces that we're tracking, and you'll be able to use our Congress Plus tool to submit your support directly to your legislator on all of our issues. And I will just say, as we're going through this information, it's going to be a lot. So if there are questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll also have an opportunity at the end for questions and have a dialogue. So we will do our best to answer those questions in the chat, and anything we don't get to, we will follow up. So I want to turn it to my team to have us walk through these next 2 slides. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystalline Black. I'm a policy analyst on the Advocacy and Civic Engagement team. My pronouns are she, her, hers. There are 4 bills that I would like to touch on today. Senate Bill 413, Public Defender Student Loan Reform. This bill establishes loan forgiveness program for public defenders and their staff, and it covers both public and private loans. Senate Bill 611, Stable Homes for Oregon Families. This bill limits the annual rent increase for renters and expands protections for renters against a landlord's terminating tenancy. Senate Bill 612, Indigenous Language Justice, establishes Indigenous Language Justice Funds with a nonprofit to develop guidelines for Indigenous language interpretation and compensation for interpreters. Senate Bill 613, Indigenous Language Justice, creates a commission to research, oversee, and make policy recommendations regarding the economic, social, legal, and political equity for Indigenous communities. And I will be passing it on to my colleague, Ronnie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Ronnie Strode, he and pronouns, and I'm a policy analyst on Jennifer's team with Crystalline. So I got 4 more top bills that are big priorities for the Urban League, and they're also on the Fair Shot for All agenda. First, the Opportunity to Serve Act. What that does is it raises the legislator wage to the Oregon median wage, which is around $58,000. Right now, legislators, after per diem and all their other payments, are only paid around $35,000, which is a barrier to access for low-income individuals and individuals of color. Second bill, Stable Homes for Oregon Families. This is a big bill that expands renter and tenant rights. First thing it does, it extends timelines to 60 days before eviction proceedings can start. It also extends the initial hearing for eviction proceedings to 10 days instead of 72 hours. It requires that landlords provide rental assistance forms and legal assistance forms in their eviction notices. It dismisses eviction cases if final payment is provided before the court hearing, and it streamlines processes for qualified individuals to seal their eviction records. The third bill, pre-plea probation, it expands eligibility for first-time offenders to plead guilty to their accused crime, and in return, they're offered probationary terms, and if they fulfill them, the whole case will go away. And the last bill is Reproductive and Gender Justice for All, which expands access to the full range of reproductive, sexual, and gender-affirming healthcare. It also recognizes that healthcare is a basic human right and that we cannot achieve racial, economic, and gender justice for all without every person having the rights, resources, and recognition to control their bodies. Next slide, please.
Great. Thank you, Ronnie. So we want to do an informal poll of the folks in the room. And so we're going to ask you to put your answers in the chat. And so we'll also put the first poll question is, without searching online, how much do you think state legislators earn annually in Oregon? Again, we'll put this in the chat, and we want to get a sense from folks. How much do you think our state legislators make? And so I'll ask the team to drop that in the chat. And you can start putting your answers in the chat. So don't be shy. So we got 32,000, we got 30,000, 35,000. We got 4,200. We got 50,000. Nice. We got 42,000. So I'm going to give it just one more second to let folks put in what they think legislators make before we give you the answer. I see some more 35s, some more 45s, 48s. Great. See folks putting responses in. And you can also feel free to submit your vote through that way as well. So it might surprise you that legislators actually make a little under $33,000 a year. And so the next question we want to ask you all is, does this compensation seem adequate, not adequate, more than adequate, given what you know about what state legislators do? And so we'll put that up as another poll, but you can also put it in the chat in terms of, if you, again, do you feel that that compensation is adequate, not adequate, or more than adequate? I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's any responses. Not seeing any, and we'll put this up and folks can still respond uh, to that question. And so we want to go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the current situation. So as I mentioned, the current salary for legislators is $32,839. So a little bit under 33. If you could please mute, that'd be great. The federal poverty level is $27,750 for a family of 4 in 2022. So legislators either need to be independently wealthy, retired or come from family money, or have a second job. And what we find is that a lot of legislators do have to have a second job. And so legislators receive $151 per day for food, transportation, lodging. And we're finding that it's insufficient, especially for those legislators that live outside the I-5 corridor. So we're talking about folks that live in rural Oregon, so they're out in Pendleton, they're outside of Salem, they're outside of Portland, and they have to commute to Salem to do their work. And so, we've made some progress. Oregon has a record number of BIPOC legislators this year, increasing from 13 in 2021 to 19 now. However, the legislature remains overly white. And, it's going to be probably difficult for some of those newer legislators to actually stay if we don't do something now. And so really want to talk to why we need to solve this issue now and why it's so important. Oregon, needs elected officials who reflect the communities they serve, collaborate on community solutions, and stay in touch with constituents year round. But currently, Oregonians are underserved. Legislators are expected to supervise their legislative offices and staff, listen to their communities and constituents, participate in community events, and research and draft bills all throughout the year, on top of participating in legislative sessions and special sessions. It is undeniable that being a state legislator is a full-time job that requires a full-time salary. And it's no coincidence that historically, Oregon's legislators have been older, wider, and wealthier than the average Oregonian. And the low legislative salary is a barrier to electing, legislators who represent the diversity of our states. So want to bring in Jessica into the conversation to talk a little bit more about opportunities to serve. And we're going to have a conversation around these 3 questions. What does legislator pay need to no, excuse me, why does legislator pay need to increase? How does the proposed bill do that? And how would it benefit from public engagement and advocacy? So I would like to welcome Jessica Maravilla from the ACLU Oregon. And yeah, we're just going to have a free flowing conversation. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And we will address them, as we are talking, and address them in when we have question and answer period at the end. So Jessica, if you're there, love for you to come off camera.
Yeah, hi Jennifer. Thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation. Love to collaborate with you and your team whenever possible. So appreciate it.
Excellent. So, in your opinion, why do you feel, or why does the ACLU of Oregon feel that, legislator pay needs to be increased?
Yeah, I think you put it beautifully. Currently, Oregonians are being underserved, right? Elected officials are who reflect the communities they serve, or at least that's what we want them to do, to collaborate on community solutions and really stay in touch with constituents year around. So because the legislator is in session only part of the year, the legislative positions are paid like a part-time position. But in reality, it really requires a full-time commitment for legislators to be successful in effectively serving our communities. Also, legislative pay is not only a financial issue, but it's a matter of equity. So in March of 2022, 3 women legislators actually decided against running for re-election, citing that the lack of financial support was a major factor. And so many others decided against running for office at all because being a legislator at the current salary is simply not sustainable. So raising legislative pay will really improve the quality and the diversity of representation in the Capitol.
Absolutely. I know for me personally, like that was my personal story. My background was one of, working on political campaigns, working for labor unions. And I'm from Northeast Portland. I grew up here and really wanted to come back and give something back to my community. I thought about running for office. But when I saw that salary, I was like, there is no way, even as a single person, with these rents being what they are, that I could sustain myself here on that salary. And so I think for me, that really was, the impetus of why I wanted to do this work, and, why this is a priority for the league, because we do work with community and we want to see our community reflected in the state legislature. And, as exciting as it is that we have a more diverse class of legislators this year, it's still not enough. We still need more. We're still a fraction of the representation that we see in the state capitol. And so I guess my question is, this bill that we're working on together, how do you see it addressing those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to respond to you too, Jennifer, like it's unfortunate that your story is not unique. A lot of our communities have actually a will to be more civically engaged and run for office, but because of the lack of sustainability in the pay, it's not even a choice many times. So expecting legislators to meet these job requirements, which you put a list out there, while also working a second job to make ends meet, again, just not sustainable. And it's a disservice to our communities, as their constituents who really need that representation, who are informed, attentive, and available. And so our bill, what it does, the bill that we're working on in collaboration with a lot of legislators, is really to increase that pay. And what it would do is it would increase the pay to the average wage of all Oregonians. So if we do a good job and that average wage goes up, their pay goes up. If things are bad in the economy, their pay goes down. So it's really a representation also of the average income of Oregonians in the state. It's a one-time vote that they would do this, and then it would be automatic for every 2 years that they would accommodate for that average income.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there is a lot of anxiety that our legislators have when it comes to conversations around increasing, their wages, and how community would feel about that. But, as you can see, 94%, or at least 33 people have indicated that that current wage is not adequate. And so, I think from your perspective, I'd love to hear how community engagement and advocacy on this issue could really make this a success, because previously we haven't been successful, excuse me, increasing legislator pay. We tried in the short session. We got really close, but didn't get across the finish line. And we've tried, excuse me, tried previously in other sessions and have not been successful. And, I really think that community aspect is what has been missing from all of those conversations. But would love to hear your thoughts.
No, absolutely. I agree with you 1000%. I think for this to actually get through that finish line, this legislative session, it will take the community to say, actually, we value legislative leadership and we want to make it accessible to everybody. And that's why we're increasing legislative pay. I think that there is this fear from legislators to say we're increasing our own pay, but if it's coming from the community at the request of the community, then it just makes sense. And I think that this is super, super valuable because at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're improving the quality and diversity of representation in the Capitol for ourselves as community. By legislators being able to dedicate more time to work with constituents, they will have a better access to their representatives. And people from all walks of life, identities, and economic backgrounds will have a real chance of actually running for office. And with more people being able to run for office, Oregon voters will have more choice in the candidates they want to support. And it would also motivate and encourage more people to participate in that civic process. So it's a full circle of not just putting, hey, we're going to increase the pay, but hey, we're actually going to promote diversity and quality at the legislative level that in return will be representative of our needs, our wants, and the communities that we live in, and we want to allow them to thrive and not just survive.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage folks, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Specifically around this issue of legislator pay. We do have an opportunity for the community to get involved. So the Urban League of Portland, please go on mute. Thank you. The Urban League of Portland works in coalition with both the ACLU of Oregon and Apano, and we're going to be hosting a community event on March 7th at Apano to speak to this very issue. We'll put the registration link in the chat. So if you're interested, if you have friends and family that you're like, hey, you should come learn about this, we'd love to have you. We're going to have food. We're going to have some prizes. We have kind of like a Price is Right game kind of set up. So you'll be at an advantage now that you know how much legislators make, but we welcome you to join us. So I'll ask my team to put that in the chat, but just really want to give some space if there are folks who have questions to put it in the chat, and we're happy to answer them. Great, just want to look to see if there's anything there. Okay, great. So what are the most common supplemental incomes vocations of our Oregon legislators? What tax brackets, do they typically fall under? I think that's a great question. I think, typically we've seen some legislators, the gamut of what they do outside of just being a legislator runs from being a nurse, being a lawyer or prosecutor, kind of some of these higher paying jobs, but then we also have folks who are bus drivers. We have folks who are kind of working lower paid jobs to help supplement those incomes, because the conversations that the league has been having with legislators, we're hearing from folks that, I have to use the wages that I make as a legislator to cover my childcare. And if I wasn't in a 2-income household, I wouldn't be able to do this work. Jessica, do you have a sense from the conversations you've had, just some of the vocations that folks have had or currently have as their second job?
Yeah, I think you've named a few already. I think that to this question, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change that. So the point is not to just have the folks that have a livable life, like a work-life balance, by being a doctor, by being a lawyer, by being, previously a prosecuting attorney, whatever that may be, but really to allow our communities to be up there and representing us and listening to us, regardless of where they come from. So that's business owners, that's stay-at-home moms? What is our community, our Black, Indigenous, people of color, whatever they're working on, what we want to do is we want to put a platform for them to be successful without the burden of thinking, I can't do that. Not because I don't have the skills, not because I'm not qualified, but because I can't afford it. And so that's a neglect to our system. And that's what we're trying to do, create that access to democracy. So I just want to make sure that that's what we're focusing on, that we want to make sure our community is up there. And our community, our average, are not those high paying jobs.
Absolutely. In terms of how do we compare with other states, we are pretty abysmal when it comes to the rate of pay for our legislators. I would say we rank bottom 10, but we can get specifics to you. So in other legislatures, they recognize that, this is the amount of work that folks are putting in is equivalent to a full-time job and should be compensated as such. And so they've made those adjustments in other states. And so we're hoping that, this legislative session, we will be successful in making those adjustments here in Oregon so that we can have a more diverse pool, as Jessica said, of candidates who choose to run and who get elected and who, more importantly, can stay in the legislature. What we've seen, and as Jessica mentioned earlier, is that, we've had some really great champions on our issues who have been in the legislature, but unfortunately have had to walk away and not run for reelection because they couldn't afford to stay doing this job, working a second job, etc. And unfortunately, I think that trend is going to continue unless we do something to change it. Is there momentum to also push for a full-time legislature like California, Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania? I would say currently there is not, but I think that should be a part of the conversation. I think the pushback or the responses that I hear from some legislators, is that, this should not be a profession for folks, that folks shouldn't seek out to be a professional politician. Whereas, I can understand why that might be the sentiments of some, but for long-term, please mute, thank you, long-term systemic change, we need to have folks who are in the building for a long period of time, at least long enough to effectuate the changes that we're working on and that they're implemented in a way that is reflective of the intent of the policy. Because not only is it important that we are pushing for and making policies that affect our communities, but we also need to make sure that they're implemented. And we need the folks who are doing that implementation to fully understand and appreciate those intentions. And so it's important to have folks with lived experience be a part of that process so that we are successful on the changes that we're advocating for. Jessica, I don't know if
Absolutely.
there's anything you want to add. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I can add that currently legislators, I think when we think of it, we think of a legislative session and then being in the Capitol building and doing the work only during the time frame of legislative session. However, I am in communication with legislators year round because they're expected to not just supervise their legislative offices and staff to list, but also to listen to their communities and constituents. And that's a year round thing. They're expected to participate in community events and research and draft bills all throughout the year. So in the interim, a lot of the proposals that we're seeing right now, that's when the work is being done. And that's when they're not in session. That's when all the research is happening. So by Oregonians, we deserve quality representation from an engaged legislator. And so when legislators are spread thin because they're juggling a second job to pay the bills, their ability to work on state issues and communicate with constituents suffers. And so for others, it could also be like the high cost of childcare being a barrier to serving as a legislator. So it's a livable wage that will lead to better quality representation from our legislators. And it is a year-round job, even though we're not saying, hey, we're going to turn the state into a year-round job title. We already know that a lot of our legislators, especially our BIPOC legislators, are already doing this.
Absolutely. And Mallory, to your question, will this legislation be statewide? will the Eastern Oregon legislature's push to become a part of Idaho have an effect on this? That's a great question. So I don't know how many folks have been tracking this push and conversation around parts of Oregon, the eastern parts of Oregon, becoming part of Idaho, because in their estimation, their values are more in line with folks who are in Idaho. I guess my response would be move to Idaho, but that's not helpful to this conversation. And so it's unclear to me how much traction that push is getting or making rather. But in terms of your question of this being statewide, this would only pertain or would only be for state legislators. And so I know that there are conversations to expand this beyond state legislators, that to be inclusive of folks, for example, who serve on school boards and other such roles. We're taking a very narrow focus. Because we believe that we need to start with the state legislature, because we think that's where the greatest needs. We understand that wages for other occupations such as judgeships is folks are still are having conversations around that, and we can continue to have that conversation, but our focus and our goal is to see that our state legislature is reflective of our communities, and we have to do that through pay, and we have to do that now, or we will continue to see, as I mentioned, folks leaving the state legislature because they just can't afford to stay there. So we'll take an additional question if anyone has one. If not, we will move on to our next, absolutely. We'll move on to our next issue, which is talking about the work that we've been doing as part of In Defense of Humanity. I will flag that we are hoping that Representative Bynum will be able to join us, but know that she has committees that are ongoing, and so the timing might be a little tight for her. And so I just want to answer this last question. So for a person, let me just go up. For a person to be considered for a state legislature or legislator position, does that person need a squeaky clean background? That's actually a really good question. And I'm not entirely sure of the requirements of being a state legislator. I think you have to be of a certain age. And if you run and you're elected, then you get sworn in. But Jessica, do you know? Just given the work that you all do at the ACLU of Oregon in terms of, folks needing a quote unquote squeaky clean background to serve?
That's a really good question. I have a tentative answer, but I don't want to give it. So actually, let me get back to you on that.
Okay, yeah, we will follow up with an answer to your question, Charles. And so, yeah, let's pivot to our next piece of policy that we're going to be talking about. And we want to start with a poll and ask, have you or someone you know ever used a public defender? You can fill out the poll, or if you want to share in the chat, you're welcome to do so, but we'll give folks a couple of seconds to respond. Great. And so we want to follow up with a second question is, do you agree that individuals who qualify for a public defense attorney should receive one? And so we'll put that in the chat, and you can feel free to put your responses in. Great. Thank you so much, team, for getting that in the chat. So we'll give folks a couple seconds to fill out the poll. Nice. I'm like, it should be 100%. I would hope that it's 100%. But just looking at the previous poll, it looks like based on the responses, about 71% of folks has known someone who's needed and used a public defender. And 100% so far of folks agree that individuals who qualify for a public defense attorney should receive one. And so we agree with that. We agree that, if you need a public defense attorney, you should absolutely have one. And so we're going to talk about 3 bills that speak to this very issue. So if we could go to the next slide. Great. So the first is Senate Bill 413, which supports the public defense workforce, including increased pay and reasonable caseloads that allow attorneys and staff to adequately represent their clients. Inclusive of 413 is also ensuring that impacted communities have a voice in policymaking related to public defense. And then lastly, create a pilot statewide service that supplements local resources where it's most needed. So meaning that we would create a strike force that would be state level employees that are attorneys that would be deployed to hotspots throughout the states who need it, meaning that they don't have an attorney readily available to represent a client on a case and would need additional help. The first would seek to set up and a student loan forgiveness program that would extend not only to attorneys who are doing public defense work, but to their support staff as well. And then we would also set up or look at moving the current commission from the judiciary to the executive. So for folks who don't know, I currently am a commissioner on the Public Defense Services Commission. I always have to think about every letter because there's so many. And as a person that doesn't have a legal background, I step into that space from the perspective of the community. And so that's one avenue that our communities have a voice in the policies that the PDSC puts forth. And we're looking to expand that voice on that commission so that more folks with lived experience are a part of that process. And then lastly, we have Senate Bill 817 that deals with pre-plea probation. And I use that term loosely because it's not necessarily probation. It's an avenue, much like folks who go through the DWI, the versionary court, special courts, where you're able to put forth a plan in consultation with your public defender to the judge to say, I'm going to agree to do X, Y, and Z. And if I complete this plan, I'm not going to have something on my record, and that I'll be able to go on with my life. But in doing so, you are forfeiting your right to a trial and you're dealing directly with the judge. If you do not complete your plan, there's additional conversations with the judge, but ultimately the judge will be in charge of determining, what the recourse is going to be. And so we want to talk a little bit about, why it is important that we are doing this work now and why we're focusing on it. So we continue to disproportionately arrest and convict more Black and Brown people in the states. An estimated 60% of Black Oregonians have a conviction compared to just 17% of white Oregonians. Going to prison lends to an average of 52% reduction in annual earnings, perpetuating economic injustice for communities of color. And we have a backlog of cases so severe that only 4% currently proceed to trial. That means that most people are accepting plea bargains behind closed doors without due process. This does not ensure justice for victims or the accused, both disproportionately most likely to be Black or Brown. And victims and communities of color have lost trust in our court process and ability to serve justice after decades of disinvestment and a lack of meaningful reforms rooted in inequity and anti-racism. Rooted in equity and anti-racism. And so we want to continue to have the conversation related to in the defense of humanity. And just so you all know, the Urban League of Portland is part of this coalition. ACLU of Oregon is also part of this coalition, as well as AFSCME. And so we've been working months prior to session on legislation we wanted to put forth to address this issue, because currently the state is facing a constitutional crisis and we just don't have enough lawyers who are doing this work in the state for the cases that need them. And so want to start off with asking, why address a public defense crisis now? Then ask, why is advocacy so important from a legislative perspective? And we're hoping that Rep. Bynum will be able to join us by then to speak to that. And then how do our proposed bills, speak to addressing the crisis? So let's start with the first. So why address the public defense crisis now? And just really want to open that up to you, Jessica, for your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Well, first of all, Oregon's public defense system is in crisis, and it's been in crisis for several years now. And there's hundreds of people who cannot afford their own attorneys who are currently in limbo, and some of them are actually in jail because the state has failed to provide that representation. So this is really a catastrophic failure that will have lasting impacts across our communities, particularly those living in poverty, using substances, experiencing mental illness, and who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color because of the stats and some of the data that you've already shown. So when someone is accused of a crime, they're presumed innocent, yet many of their freedoms are taken away while their cases are being resolved. Some have to await trial in jail, while others are tracked with ankle monitors that they have to pay for. Many lose their jobs. They're prohibited from seeing their children. There's a lack of representation that prolongs these painful consequences for individuals and their families and their communities. And so public defenders providers do so much more than just provide representation in the courtroom. They often connect their clients to essential services such as healthcare, housing, job training. And really in our current system, public defenders' caseloads are just really high for them to actually practice their craft to the fullest extent. And they are not state employees. Many work as independent contractors without medical benefits, and still others are assigned to cases the morning of and are expected to fulfill the constitutional promise of a robust defense. So, prosecutors don't face these challenges. So the why now is because our communities are currently being violated or deprived from a constitutional right, and those consequences are long-term and are very severe.
Absolutely. And I think, the league is in agreement with much of what you said. And I think for us, what is especially pressing and urgent is that, I talked about how we make up 60% of the convictions, yet we're less than 3% of the population. And so for us, it is important that we speak on this issue. It is important that we make it known to our legislators that this is important to us, that change needs to happen now, that we need to stop the bleeding of lawyers leaving the profession because they can get, higher rates of pay doing other work, that, this work is valuable and that any of us is one life event away from needing a public defender. And I think the poll that we had bears that out. 72%, again, know someone who needed a public defender or they themselves needed one. And so that just shows that like any of us could be in that situation where we need representation. And, I don't know about you, but I don't have thousands of dollars just sitting around for an attorney in case I need one. I have bills to pay, and I'm sure many folks on this call also have bills to pay. And it's not necessarily something that we think of, and we come to rely on a system that is constitutionally mandated be made available, that if we need representation, we should expect to get that representation, and not only get that representation, but that we are represented to the level that the prosecution has in terms of resources, whether that be investigators, whether that be just the time that the public defense attorney has to look through our case. There should be equity in both of those spaces. And currently that is not the case, just due to the amount of caseloads that folks are carrying, as well as the pay that they're receiving is not adequate, et cetera. And so we're hoping to change that. And so just want to check in with my team just to see if Rep. Bynum has made it. If not, we will proceed to the last question and come back to the second question. And so in the interim, I want to ask, how do our proposed bills do that? I mean, I talked a little bit kind of high level about our bills, but would love to get into kind of the nitty gritty of, why we're proposing something, and why legislators should lead with our proposals versus some of the others that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you hit on a lot of points, Jennifer, that what we're looking at with the public defense system and the solution that we bring with Senate Bill 413 and the combination of Senate Bill 817 is really that community approach. It's an attempt to look at the whole public defense system and try to tweak it from different ways to solve for the problem. So it's not just, hey, we want to increase the attorney's pay and make their caseloads less. It's more about quality representation and what is everybody's role in the public defense system to narrow it down as well. So not just about funding, but how do we solve for the issues on there? What is the role of judges? What is the role of prosecutors and not just the public defenders? How do they play into it? And how do they bring diversity, equity, and most importantly, effective legal representation to everybody that needs one? And you made a great point that, who has a couple $1,000s and just to be able to hire a private attorney. And I think when we think of that, most of us think of, well, maybe that's not my case, right? But really, if you look at that income, it's most of us. It's teachers, is the ones that have student loan payments that we need to make. So it's a lot of us that it would impact if we were ever accused of a crime right now. Would we really have those hundreds, thousands of dollars laying around to hire a private attorney? Because we know we will not be receiving ineffective counsel. And so what our bills are trying to do is really to support the public defense system in an integral step toward a more equitable and just Oregon. And we can't begin addressing the immediate crisis without building toward a more sustainable and just system. So it's a parallel approach that we're trying to do. We know that we sorely need more resources to support a robust public defense workforce and really maintain that sustainable caseloads, but that's just the beginning. We also need to examine again the prosecution practices and more effective routes to justice outside of incarceration and crushing fines, which we know that they impact most of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we need the judges to balance the scales of justice, really by dismissing nonviolent cases and prioritizing those limited resources that we do have for those cases that make our communities truly safer.
And look at that. Rep Bynum, your timing is impeccable. We were just discussing public defense and asking the question of, why is advocacy so important, especially from the perspective of a legislator. So one, I would love for you to introduce yourself. We gave a little bit of background to your illustrious career so far, but again, would love to have you reintroduce yourself and would love to hear your thoughts on, why is it so important that community get involved, especially on this issue related to public defense?
All right, thank you, everyone. I am State Representative Janelle Bynum, coming to you live from the Capitol. I have a heart for this work because I believe that even just being remotely involved with the justice system changes a lot of people's options. And I had a colleague ask me today about marijuana expunsions and what our experience had been with them. And what I shared with him was that once people get justice involved, whether it was through marijuana or any other thing, it became a gateway. It became a gateway to more justice involvement. And so without an attorney, without a public defender, people end up sentenced longer, taking deals they should not take. It becomes a burden on people's families. It becomes a burden on people's children. It becomes a burden on society that actually should not, it shouldn't last any longer than it should last. So I believe that the crime should fit the time. And your advocacy means that when we're writing bills, it helps give us perspective that a lot of people in the building don't have. And so if you've lived a fairly charmed life, you have no idea what it means to live in fear of being stopped by the police or being falsely accused of something.
Absolutely. Would love to hear also your perspective, just related to, why should we be addressing the public defense crisis now when we know there are so many competing priorities that the legislature is going to have to contend with? Why this specific issue, excuse me, now?
So I think this is an issue that's been kicked down the can's been kicked down the road so many times. It clearly is a constitutional right that people have, but for some reason people in Oregon don't believe that our money should be invested in that. And so yes, we need more public defenders. But I also think that there should be investments in our children and our communities so that people don't even get close to the justice system. And when you have that feedback loop of the public defense process, that can inform public health decisions, can inform public investment decisions on parks and recreation and education and mental health, then you have a more robust community. Uh, I think that we have not adequately funded the growth of the public defense system in terms of just, paying people fairly and keeping caseloads at a manageable level. But we're also not producing enough lawyers to even fill the pipeline. And so I've pushed back on the Oregon State Bar to say, you guys do a whole lot of stuff, but you're not complaining about the number of spots we have in law schools, the level of recruiting that we're doing. You're not complaining about the bar exam process. They are doing a little bit of work on that, but all of those things help feed the pipeline to have an adequate number of public defenders.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, there's also not enough noise around how can we recruit and retain diverse candidates that go to law school and then become public defenders. Because we see that when a client has a shared lived experience or shared cultural background, it really truly makes a difference in how they're defended and the outcomes of their cases. And so, thank you so much, and just want to just give space if there are any closing remarks that you might have on this issue before we pivot to questions that are in the chat.
I'll just say that the Capitol and the legislative process belongs to everyone. It belongs to every Oregonian, and it belongs even to people outside of Oregon because we have a shared interest in the policies that are passed in this state. And if you look at the 23 policing bills that we passed 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, those bills are being modeled after in other parts of the country. So your voice, your friends, and your family's voices absolutely matter in the policies that we pass.
Thank you so much for your time. We know that you're busy, so we will let you reclaim the rest of your day to continue the good work in the state capitol. Again, we appreciate you being here. And thank you, if someone hasn't said it today, thank you so much for all that you do for our communities, and especially on behalf of the Urban League of Portland. You've been a great champion of ours, and we look forward to continuing the work. Thank you so much. Great. And to answer the question that's in the chat, do private attorney offices not take some amount of public defense cases? That's a fantastic question. So the way the system is set up in the state of Oregon is that you have the PDSC, as I mentioned, so the Public Defense Service Agency, I should say, um, and they're in charge of contracting for public defense work that is done in the state. And so you have the set of nonprofit attorneys that take on contracts, and then you have for-profit or private firms that take on contracting work. And that percentage of kind of who does public defense work varies from nonprofit to nonprofit, and it varies from private for-profit firms as well. And so uh, most often these private firms come in when there's a conflict on the case, meaning that the public defender knows both the alleged perpetrator or defendant, excuse me, and the victim in the case. And they're like, hey, I can't represent this person in this case because I know too much about both of these parties. So it conflicts out. And that's where the private attorney comes in and says, I will take that case because I don't know any of these people, and I'm happy to represent this person. And so the agency negotiates rates of work for these cases, and oversees kind of the ratio of like how many cases the nonprofits take and how many cases the private firms take. And we see that it's not enough because part of it is that we don't currently have enough lawyers. We only have about a third of the lawyers that we need in the state to do the work. And so we have to grow our workforce. But as we're growing our workforce, we have to retain the folks that we currently have doing the work. And right now, we're not doing a good job of retaining those people. So you're seeing folks leave because of all the things we talked about to go work at private firms that may or may not do public defense work. It's a little complicated, but really not that complicated. I mean, fundamentally, it's a workforce issue. And so we can solve the issue of workforce, but also more broadly have the conversation around how do we shrink the criminal justice system so there isn't a high demand for representation, because jail should not be the default for folks, especially in a state when we are disproportionately jailed and incarcerated. Those are the same things. Yes. And so we're looking to also have that conversation as well. And part of the start of that conversation is through or this pre-plea diversion piece of legislation that gives folks the opportunity to, take responsibility for their actions, to work a plan and to be successful at that plan, so that they don't have something on their record that would possibly preclude them from getting state assistance, federal assistance, etc. Yeah, most folks have that impression that they are required, but they're not. And so it just really depends on, who's available to take the case in terms of, their skill set, meeting the needs of that case, and who's willing to take the current rates, which is dictated by the agency. And so we're doing work to improve that, but it's going to take us a while to get to a rate that should be commensurate with what folks should be paying or getting paid, excuse me. So I hope that y'all are like super agitated to like get involved and take action and talk to your legislator about why this issue is important and why it's important to you. And you want to make your voices heard. Here are some ways that you can do that. So as it pertains to In Defense of Humanity, you can share your experience interacting with Oregon's criminal justice system, or sign a petition to advocate for a fair and effective criminal justice system by visiting Fair Shot's website and clicking the In Defense of Humanity survey link, which we will put in the chat. And we will also make all of the information that I'm speaking about today included in an email that you all get sent. So you'll have the survey links, you'll have the event link that I spoke about earlier, and you'll be able to take action. The other thing that you can do is take another survey related to opportunity to serve that seeks to really get a sense of how do Oregonians feel about legislator pay, and what are some potential changes that could happen that they would be supportive of. And then lastly, at the League, we have what's called Congress Plus. You can go to the website. We have all of the pieces of policy that we are tracking, not just the 8 that we spoke about today. So you'll be able to speak on a multitude of different issues. And we encourage you to spend some time going through each of them, reading through, what's being proposed. And if you're so inclined and if you're moved to do so, we've uploaded templates that you can use to get you started. But absolutely feel free to customize them and really share your personal story, because I can only advocate so much and legislators are like, that's cool, you make some valid points, but hearing from community, specifically hearing from their constituents, that's what really motivates legislators to make change. And so if you go through Congress Plus, you find something that, you're motivated to act on, you can click on the link, fill it out, send it in, and those testimonies will be emailed directly to the legislator that represents your area based on the address you enter. And as always, please let us know if you have any questions, and we can put our email address, which is up on the screen, but also put it in the chat. So if you all are going through these templates and you're like, I would like additional information on this specific issue, please let us know. And we're happy to talk about any and all of them because my team has been tracking them since before session, and we'll track them throughout session. And yeah, we'll be talking about the 2 policy priorities that we spoke about today at our in-person day of action. So for those of you who are joining us, you'll have a leg up on the information and can speak to them when you meet with legislators on Thursday. And again, if you have any questions, the information is in the chat. But really just appreciate you all taking the time out to learn about our priorities, hearing from Jessica Maravilla with the ACLU of Oregon, hearing from Rep. Bynum, and hopefully if we've done our jobs, y'all are fired up and ready to go. I apologize. It is a throwback from my campaign days, and it's like just automatic for me to say that when I get excited. So yeah, again, like I said, we appreciate your time, and let us know if you have questions. So thank you so much. That is the end of our presentation today. Thanks, everyone. And we'll make sure that you get this email, as I mentioned, with all the information, all the links, anything and all that you may need to participate. And we'll be sure to share out this recording via our email, via the team here at Urban League, and through our social media so folks can get caught up. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye, all.